At 4:17 in the morning, my husband Brandon was pacing circles around our living room in his socks, phone pressed so hard against his ear that I could see the white outline of his fingers even from across the hallway. His voice had that specific pitch, high, cracked around the edges, that I'd only ever heard from him twice before in 6 years of marriage. Once when his dog died. Once when his dad had a heart scare at a Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. Mom, Mom, pick up. Why aren't you answering me? He didn't look at me. He never looked at me. He just paced and dialed and paced again, and I stood in the doorway of our bedroom in my oversized sleep shirt with my arms crossed, watching him unravel. And I did not say a single word, because I knew exactly where his mother was. I knew exactly what she had done. And I knew exactly what he was going to find the moment he finally got into his car and drove the 11 minutes across town to her apartment on Ridgecrest Drive. I had known for about 45 minutes at that point, and every single one of those 45 minutes, I had let him panic. Was that cruel? Maybe. But here's the thing about cruelty. Sometimes it's the only language certain people understand after years of trying every other option. I'm Ashley. And this is the story of the night I stopped being the reasonable one. Let me back up. Because if I just drop you into the 4 a.m. chaos, you won't understand why I was standing in that doorway with a smirk on my face instead of helping my husband calm down. You need to understand what our life looked like before all of this. You need to understand what I had built, what I had protected, what I had swallowed down and smiled through for years before that particular Tuesday night broke something open in me that I don't think I'd ever be able to close again. Brandon and I met at a work happy hour 7 years ago. He was in sales. I was in project management at a mid-sized logistics company in the Denver metro area. He was funny and tall and had this way of listening to you. Really listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. That made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. We dated for 14 months. He proposed at a hiking trail outside Boulder on a Saturday morning when the aspens were just starting to turn gold, and it was genuinely one of the most beautiful moments of my life. We got married on a Saturday in September. Small wedding, about 70 people, at a vineyard outside Fort Collins. My dress was blush pink, which my mother said was unconventional, but I didn't care. Brandon cried during his vows. I'm talking actual tears running down his face, not just the polite eyes glistening thing. My maid of honor, my college roommate Jess, leaned over and whispered, "Okay, I officially approve." And I laughed into my bouquet. We bought our house 2 years after the wedding. A 3-bedroom ranch style in a suburb called Thornfield. Good school district, even though we didn't have kids yet. A 2-car garage, a backyard with a sprinkler system, and a maple tree that went absolutely insane with color every October. The mortgage was $2,340 a month. We could handle it. We had built this together. My salary plus his commissions, a shared savings account, a joint checking account, a Roth IRA each, and a household budget that I managed in a Google spreadsheet that I updated every single Sunday night like the responsible, type A person I have always been. Life was genuinely good. I want you to understand that. I'm not setting up some tragic backstory where I was secretly miserable and didn't know it. I loved my husband. I loved our house. I loved Sunday mornings when he made eggs and we watched cooking competition shows and argued about who deserved to win. I loved that he remembered I hated cilantro and always ordered my food without it when he called ahead. I loved the particular way he smelled after a shower. Some specific combination of his shampoo and whatever body wash he used that I've never been able to identify but would recognize anywhere. We were good. We were solid. We were the kind of couple that their friends came to for advice. The one crack in the foundation had always been the same. His mother, Linda. Linda Mercer, née Kowalski, 63 years old, retired administrative assistant, current full-time hobby, making my life difficult. I want to be fair here because I think fairness matters even when you're telling a story about someone who drove you to the edge of your sanity. Linda wasn't a monster. She didn't have a villainous origin story. She was just a woman who had raised her son alone after her husband walked out when Brandon was 9, who had worked 2 jobs to keep them in their apartment, who had given everything she had to making sure Brandon had what he needed, and who had never, not once in the 6 years I had known her, been able to let go of the idea that Brandon was hers in a way that superseded everything and everyone else, including me. She lived 11 minutes away from us. This was Brandon's doing. When we were house hunting, he had specifically filtered the search radius to keep us within 15 minutes of her. I had agreed to this because I loved him, and I thought naively that proximity would make things easier. If she could pop over for Sunday dinners and we could include her in holidays without it being a logistical production, she'd feel secure. She'd feel included. She'd relax. She did not relax. What she did instead was treat our house like an extension of her own. She showed up without calling first. She rearranged things in my kitchen. She left opinions about our furniture and our paint colors and our grocery choices in the way that people leave fingerprints. Everywhere. On everything, and almost impossible to fully clean off. She called Brandon at least once a day, sometimes twice. She referred to our home as Brandon's house in a way that was technically ambiguous, but felt every single time like a deliberate erasure. And Brandon, sweet, genuine, loving Brandon, had a blind spot the size of the continental United States when it came to his mother. He didn't see the patterns, or he saw them and couldn't name them. Or he could name them and couldn't bring himself to confront them, because Linda was the woman who had held everything together when his father left, and he carried a debt to her that he had never fully examined, but that governed his behavior in ways I don't think he fully understood. I had tried. I had conversations with him, calm ones, then less calm ones. I had read articles about enmeshment and boundaries and gently placed them in his line of sight. I had tried talking to Linda directly, which went about as well as you'd expect. I had tried being warmer, thinking maybe she'd soften if I made more effort. I had tried pulling back, thinking maybe she'd respect distance if I created some. Nothing worked, because nothing was going to work, and it took me years longer than it should have to understand why. But all of that slow erosion, all of those years of trying to hold the line and losing ground inch by inch, none of it compares to the Tuesday night when Linda crossed a line so specific, so concrete, so completely undeniable that even Brandon couldn't explain it away. She took my bank card. Not Brandon's, not a joint card, mine. The debit card attached to my personal checking account, the one I kept in the small ceramic dish on the entryway table because I always set it there when I came home from work. The account that had $3,847 in it, which I was saving for a very specific purpose I'll get to. The card that had my name on it, Ashley Mercer, in embossed letters across the front. She took it sometime while we were sleeping. And she went and spent $2,200 of my money on a fur coat at a 24-hour luxury consignment boutique downtown that I didn't even know existed. I found out before Brandon did, because my banking app sent me a fraud alert at 3:31 a.m. I stared at the notification for a full minute, lying there in the dark, my heart beating in a strange, distant way, like it was trying to process something that my brain hadn't caught up to yet. The charge read, Prestige, Furs and Consignment, $2,200, and then 12 seconds later, a location ping, because I had that feature enabled. The purchase had been made 2.3 miles from our house. I got up. I went to the entryway. I looked in the ceramic dish. My card was gone. I stood there in the dark hallway of the house we had built together, in my socks on the hardwood floor. And I made a decision in about 30 seconds that took 6 years of accumulated frustration to arrive at. I went back to bed. I did not wake Brandon. I did not call Linda. I did not cancel the card. I just lay there and waited. And when Brandon's phone started buzzing at 4:02 a.m. with an automated security call from his own bank, because Linda, in her confidence or her carelessness, had apparently also tried to use the card a second time somewhere else and triggered a secondary alert. I watched him wake up confused, and I watched understanding begin to creep across his face in pieces, and I watched him start to panic as calls to his mother went straight to voicemail. At 4:17, when he was pacing and calling and not looking at me, I knew he was about 30 minutes away from getting in his car and driving to Ridgecrest Drive. And I knew what he was going to find there. And I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed and I did not say a word. and something that had been clenched tight in my chest for a very long time finally. Quietly, let go. He left at 4:23 a.m. I heard the garage door grind open, heard his car back out, heard the mechanical groan as it closed again behind him. Then silence. Just the refrigerator hum and the sound of my own breathing and the glow of my phone screen in the dark kitchen where I'd moved after getting tired of standing in the doorway. I made coffee. Full pot, not just a cup, because I knew this was going to be a long morning and I wanted something to do with my hands. While it brewed, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my banking app again and stared at the transaction for the fourth time. Prestige. Furs and consignment. $2,200. Processed at 3:14 a.m. $2,200. Out of 3,847. Which meant Linda had taken just over half of everything I had in that account in a single swipe. At 3 in the morning. At a fur coat boutique I'd never heard of. With a card she had stolen out of a ceramic dish in my entryway, while Brandon and I were asleep 20 feet away. I kept waiting to feel something more dramatic than what I was actually feeling, which was this specific, very quiet, almost crystalline kind of calm. Like when you've been waiting for a storm for so long that when it finally hits, the sound of rain on the roof is almost a relief. My phone buzzed. Not a banking alert this time. A text from Brandon. She's not answering the door either. Her car is here. I typed back. I know where she is. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. What do you mean you know where she is? I set the phone down and poured my coffee. Let him sit with that for a minute. Then I picked it back up. Check your texts. You got a bank alert around 4 a.m. That wasn't from your account. That was a secondary alert they sent because the card was flagged. My card. Brandon. The one from the ceramic dish by the front door. The 3 dots appeared and stayed for a long time. Long enough that I got up, added creamer to my coffee, stirred it, sat back down. I don't understand, he finally wrote. Your mother took my debit card out of the dish while we were sleeping. She went to a place called Prestige Furs and Consignment on Larimer Street and spent $2,200 on a fur coat. My money. My personal account. She's probably still there or just got back. Try the door again. More dots. Then nothing for 2 full minutes. Then his name lit up on my screen. Calling, not texting. I let it ring. 3 times. 4. Sent it to voicemail. He called again immediately. This time I answered. Ashley. His voice was different now. The panic had changed shape. It wasn't the frantic "where is my mother" panic anymore. It was something lower and more careful. Ashley, I'm standing outside her door. I can hear the TV on inside. She's home. Okay, I said. She spent $2,200 on a fur coat. Yes. From your account. From my personal checking account. Yes. A pause. Long enough that I could hear the ambient sound through the phone. A dog barking somewhere on Ridgecrest Drive, the distant hum of an early morning garbage truck. How did she get your card? I keep it in the dish by the front door. She was here yesterday evening, remember? You had her over for dinner. She must have taken it then. Another pause. Ashley, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe she thought it was... Brandon. I kept my voice completely even. The card has my name on it. Ashley Mercer, in raised letters across the front. There is no explanation. I heard him knock on her door. Hard. 3 times, the way you knock when you're not asking permission anymore. Then his muffled voice. Mom, I know you're in there. I can hear the TV. Open the door. A long silence. Then I heard it. The sound of a deadbolt turning. Hold on, Brandon said into the phone, and then his voice moved away, directed at someone else. Mom, what? Is that a fur coat? And then I heard Linda's voice for the first time that morning, and it was not the voice of a woman who had been caught doing something wrong. It was the voice of a woman who was mildly irritated at being disturbed at 4:30 in the morning. Brandon, why are you here? It's the middle of the night. Mom, Ashley's card is missing. She got a charge notification at 3 in the morning from a first store downtown. Did you go? I needed a coat. Her voice was so straightforward, so unbothered, that for a second even I went still on my end of the phone. It's getting cold. I found a beautiful one. Real fox fur, Brandon. You should see it. I've wanted one for years. Mom. His voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. You used Ashley's card. I'll pay her back. You, what? I'll pay her back. It's not a big deal, Brandon. Stop looking at me like that. I didn't have enough in my account right now, and I knew Ashley had money sitting there, and I thought, it's family. It's fine. I'll pay it back by the end of the month. I sat very still in my kitchen, 4 miles away, listening to this through a phone pressed against my ear, and I thought about the $3,847 that had been sitting in my personal checking account. I thought about why I had been saving it. I thought about how carefully I had been putting away $200 every paycheck for the past 8 months, specifically, quietly, for one particular purpose that I had not yet told Brandon about. And then I thought about the word Linda had just used. Family. That one word was a passkey that unlocked every boundary, every door, every account with my name on it. I said nothing. I kept listening. You can't just use someone's card without asking, Brandon was saying, and he sounded genuinely confused, like he was explaining a concept he couldn't believe needed explaining. Mom, that's theft. That's literally what that is. Theft. Linda's voice sharpened. You're going to use that word with me? I'm your mother. I raised you alone. I worked 2 jobs so you could have what you needed, and now you're standing in my doorway at 4 in the morning calling me a thief over a coat? I'm not calling you a thief. I'm saying what it looks like. It looks like my son's wife has got him so turned around he can't tell the difference between family helping family and stealing. I set my coffee mug down on the table. Slowly, deliberately. Ashley is family, Brandon said, and I felt something small and warm flicker in my chest at that. A tiny, reflexive hope that I immediately recognized and immediately distrusted, because I had felt that flicker before. Many times. And every single time it had been followed by the thing that Brandon did next. But she has to understand, he continued, that in our family we take care of each other. Mom, I'll talk to her. We'll figure out the money. Just, can you please put the card somewhere and I'll bring it back to her in the morning? There it was. Right there. I'll talk to her. Like I was the one who needed to be talked to. Like I was the one sitting in a fur coat at 4:30 in the morning after having committed what the state of Colorado would classify, without ambiguity, as financial fraud. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it, didn't throw it. I just ended the call quietly, set the phone face down on the table, and sat there for a moment with my hands wrapped around my coffee mug. The house was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car drove past on our street, headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen wall and then gone. My phone lit up immediately. Brandon calling back. I didn't answer. It lit up again. Again. Then a text. Ashley, please pick up. I'm coming home. We need to talk about this together. I stared at those words. Together. As if this were a problem we had jointly created. As if the solution required my cooperation and flexibility and willingness to understand that in our family, we take care of each other. I thought about the $3,847. I thought about what I had been saving it for. And I thought about the fact that Linda had known, she must have known, that the money was there. That I kept that card in that dish. That we would be asleep. That she could just take it and apologize later, and Brandon would smooth it over and I would swallow it down like I had swallowed everything else, because that was what I did. That was what I had always done. Except here was the thing that Linda had gotten wrong. The thing she couldn't have known because I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Brandon. That $3,847 was not just savings. It was a retainer. I had made an appointment 3 weeks earlier with a family law attorney named Patricia Holloway, whose office was in a brick building on 16th Street downtown, and who had a 5-star Google rating and a specialty in high-conflict divorce cases. The retainer to begin proceedings was $4,000. I had been $43 short. I had planned to transfer a small amount from our joint account this Friday to cover it, quietly, and make the call to Patricia's office on Monday. Linda had just spent $2,200 of it on a fur coat. She had not just stolen money. She had stolen the specific money I was using to leave her son. And she had no idea. My phone buzzed one more time. Not Brandon this time. A text from an unknown number, but the message told me immediately who it was, because Linda didn't believe in saving contacts. Ashley, I hope you're not going to make this into a whole thing. I'll pay you back. You know Brandon and I have always been close, and sometimes you just have to accept that. We're family. I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it, saved it to a folder I had already created on my phone labeled simply PH for Patricia Holloway, and set my phone back down on the table. I heard Brandon's car pull into the garage at 4:51 a.m. I heard the door from the garage into the house open. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, slow and heavy. The footsteps of a man trying to figure out what he was going to say before he got to the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted and guilty and like he wanted me to make this easier for him, which was the most Brandon expression I had ever seen on his face. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He folded his hands on the surface in front of him in that way he did when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. "I talked to her," he said. "She knows what she did was wrong. She's going to pay you back. I think she's been struggling a little financially and she didn't want to ask. And she saw the card and she made a really bad decision. And I'm sorry, Ashley. I'm genuinely sorry. That was not okay." I looked at him for a long moment. "I want the card back tonight," I said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." "Of course, I have it." He reached into his jacket pocket and set my debit card on the table between us. "She gave it to me right away. She really is sorry. I think she just..." "Brandon." I picked up the card and held it in my hand. "I need you to understand something. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is grabbing the wrong card by accident. This was a deliberate decision she made while we were sleeping, after coming into our home for dinner, after sitting at our table. She took my card knowing whose it was, and she drove across town at 3 a.m. and spent over $2,000. He was quiet. He was looking at the table. "She said she'll pay it back," he said finally. "She said she'll pay it back by the end of the month." I set the card back down. "Does she have $2,200 to pay back by the end of the month?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "I didn't think so," I said. Brandon looked up at me then, and his face was doing that thing it did sometimes. That complicated, exhausted thing where I could see him trying to hold two realities at once and failing to reconcile them. The reality where his mother was a woman who had sacrificed everything for him and deserved loyalty and protection. And the reality where his wife was sitting across from him at 5 a.m. holding a bank card that had just been stolen. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. And the way he said it, genuinely asking like he actually didn't know, was somehow the saddest and most infuriating thing he had said all night. Because I had wanted him to do something about this for 6 years. I had told him, shown him, explained to him, and asked him, and begged him, and the answer had always been the same. His mother, his blind spot, his debt to her that he had never fully examined. And now here we were at 5 a.m, and he was asking me what I wanted him to do. And the real answer, the true answer that I was not ready to say out loud yet, not tonight, was sitting in a folder on my phone labeled PH. "I want you to think very carefully," I said instead, "about what kind of marriage you think we're in." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like." I stood up, picked up my coffee mug, and rinsed it in the sink. "I'm going to try to get a couple more hours of sleep. We'll talk more when we're not running on no sleep at 5 a.m. I walked past him toward the hallway. He didn't stop me, but just before I reached the bedroom door, my phone buzzed one more time in my hand. I looked down. It was an email from Patricia Holloway's office, a calendar reminder for the consultation appointment I had scheduled for the following Thursday. I clicked it off quickly and kept walking, but Brandon was right behind me in the hallway. He'd followed me without my noticing, and when I turned, his eyes dropped, just for a fraction of a second, to my phone screen. I didn't know what he'd seen. The notification had been brief, but something shifted in his face. Something subtle and uncertain, and he looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at me in a long time. Like he was seeing something he had been trying very hard not to see. I lay in the dark for about 20 minutes after that, staring at the ceiling, listening to Brandon move around in the hallway outside the bedroom door. He didn't come in. I could hear him. The creak of the hallway floorboards, the particular way he cleared his throat when he was anxious, the distant sound of him filling a glass of water in the kitchen. He was out there, waiting for me to come out and start the conversation. Waiting for me to be the one who crossed the distance. I didn't move. At some point, I heard him settle onto the couch. The TV came on low. Not a show, just the ambient murmur of something. The way people turn on noise when the silence is too loud. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Patricia Holloway's office, which I had driven past 3 times before I actually went inside. A brick building on 16th Street. A small brass nameplate by the door. A waiting room with good lighting and a bowl of individually wrapped peppermints on the receptionist's desk, which I had found oddly comforting. I had gone in on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks ago on my lunch break, and I had sat across from a woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a legal pad in front of her. And I had explained my situation in the calm, organized way I explain everything. And Patricia Holloway had listened without interrupting and then said, "Ashley, I want you to hear me when I tell you that what you're describing is a pattern, not a series of incidents. And the law has tools for patterns." That sentence had stayed with me. The law has tools for patterns. I thought about that now, lying in the dark while my husband sat on our couch watching nothing. The problem was the money. That was the immediate, concrete, logistical problem that everything else hinged on. Patricia's retainer was $4,000. I had been $43 short. Now I was $2,243 short because Linda had taken the bulk of what I'd saved and spent it on a fox fur coat at 3 in the morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. The savings were gone. The timeline was gone. And with every hour that passed, the window I had been carefully constructing for myself, quiet, private, mine, felt like it was closing. I picked up my phone. 5:47 a.m. I opened my banking app and looked at the account again. $1,647. That was what was left. $1,647. After the $2,200 charge from Prestige Furs. After my automatic phone bill payment that had processed at midnight. After the small auto transfer I'd set up to round up purchases to savings. $1,647. Not enough. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes. I think I slept for maybe 2 hours. It wasn't real sleep. It was the fragmented, half-conscious kind where you're aware of every sound in the house and your brain keeps cycling through the same thoughts like a screen that won't go dark. At some point, I heard Brandon's alarm go off, the one he set for work. And then the sound of him moving around, the shower running, the smell of coffee drifting under the bedroom door. Normal morning sounds. The sounds of a life continuing to operate as though nothing had cracked open in the middle of the night. I waited until I heard the garage door open and close. Then I lay there for another 10 minutes, just to be sure. When I got up and walked into the kitchen, there was a mug set out for me with a sticky note folded against it. Brandon's handwriting. The particular slanted print he used when he was trying to say something carefully. "I'm sorry about tonight. We'll figure this out. I love you." I stood there reading it for a moment. Then I folded it in half and put it in the kitchen junk drawer, underneath the takeout menus and the expired coupons and the random batteries we'd been meaning to test for 2 years. I poured coffee. I sat down at the table. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I opened my laptop. The thing I had not let myself fully think through until that moment. The thing I had been holding at arm's length because it felt too cold, too calculated, too much like a door I couldn't unopen, was this. Linda had committed financial fraud. Not metaphorically. Not in the loose, conversational way people sometimes describe pushy relatives. She had taken a payment card belonging to another person and used it without authorization to make a purchase. In the state of Colorado, that is a crime. Specifically, it falls under CRS 18-5-702, which covers identity theft and financial device fraud. Patricia Holloway had mentioned this, in passing, during our consultation. She hadn't been talking about Linda specifically. She hadn't known about Linda yet. She'd been talking about financial documentation generally, about how paper trails matter in high-conflict divorces, about how courts respond to demonstrated patterns of financial misconduct within a household. But the information had lodged somewhere in the back of my brain. And now, at 6:30 in the morning, with $2,200 missing from my personal account and a text from Linda on my phone telling me not to make it into a whole thing, I opened a browser window and I started reading. It took me about 40 minutes to understand what I was looking at well enough to know what I needed to do. I made a list. Not a mental list. An actual list, typed into a notes document on my laptop, because I am the kind of person who types lists when the alternative is sitting with my hands shaking and my thoughts spinning in circles. 1. Screenshot all bank notifications and the location ping. 2. Pull the full transaction record from the bank's app. 3. Screenshot Linda's text. I'll pay you back / we're family. 4. Call the bank. Report the unauthorized transaction. 5. Contact Patricia Holloway's office. Explain the situation. Ask about payment options or adjusted timeline. That last one was the one I kept staring at. I'd been $43 short of the retainer. Now I was over $2,000 short. I didn't have a second savings pool I could pull from without Brandon noticing. Our joint account had money in it, but any withdrawal over a few $100s would show up immediately, and Brandon monitored that account. Not in a controlling way, just in the way that a person who is raised with financial anxiety monitors accounts because it makes him feel safe. I couldn't pull from the joint account without him knowing. I couldn't tell him why I needed the money. And I couldn't wait another 8 months to rebuild what Linda had just destroyed in one night. I sat there, hands around my coffee mug, staring at that list. My phone buzzed. Not Brandon, not Linda. A name I hadn't expected. Jess. Jess, my college roommate. My maid of honor. The person who had leaned over at my wedding and said I officially approve while Brandon cried through his vows. The text said, "Hey, you okay?" Brandon called Michael this morning. I don't know exactly what happened, but Michael said something about his mom and I'm here if you need to talk. I stared at that text for a long time. Jess and her husband Michael lived 40 minutes south of us in Castle Rock. We got dinner with them every 6 or 8 weeks. Jess was the only person in my life who had ever said out loud, without me prompting it, that she thought the dynamic with Linda was not normal. She'd said it once, carefully, about 2 years ago, after a dinner where Linda had shown up to our house unannounced while Jess and Michael were already there and had proceeded to spend the entire evening speaking exclusively to Brandon as though the rest of us were furniture. After they left that night, Jess had texted me. "That was wild. Are you okay?" "That's not a normal mom thing. That's a something else thing." I had texted back. "I know, it's a whole thing. I'm handling it." And we had never really talked about it directly again, because I was always handling it, right up until the moment I wasn't. I looked at her text now. "I'm here if you need to talk." I typed, "Can you call me?" She called in 40 seconds, didn't even wait a full minute. "Okay," she said before I could speak. "Tell me what happened." So I told her. I told her everything. The ceramic dish, the 3:31 a.m. fraud alert, the fur coat, the $2,200 Brandon at Linda's door, Linda's unbothered voice saying, "I'll pay her back. It's family." Brandon's note on the coffee mug this morning. And then I told her the part I hadn't told anyone. The folder on my phone labeled P.H. Patricia Holloway, the retainer, the plan that Linda had just cut the legs out from under without even knowing it existed. Jess was quiet for a moment when I finished. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, the kind where you can tell someone is actually thinking instead of just waiting to respond. "How much are you short?" she asked. "For the retainer? Now? About $2,200. Another pause. Then, "Ashley, I have $2,200. I felt something shift in my chest. Not the warm flicker of hope I'd felt and distrusted at 5 in the morning when Brandon had said Ashley is family. Something steadier than that. Something that felt less like hope and more like ground. "Jess, I can't—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. And before you say anything about paying me back, I'm going to tell you that I have been watching this situation for 2 years, and if $2,200 is what it takes to get you out of it, that is the best $2,200 I will ever spend." I pressed my fingers against my mouth for a moment because something was threatening to come apart in my face, and I needed a second to hold it together. "You'd have to send it to my personal account," I said finally. "Not the joint one." "Obviously," she said without missing a beat. "Send me the account number. I'll do it right now while I have you on the phone." "Jess." "I know. I haven't told him yet." "I know. I don't know exactly when I'm going to." "Ashley." Her voice was very even. "You don't owe me a timeline. You don't owe me anything. Send me the account number." I opened my banking app with my thumb shaking slightly, and I read her the account number. And I heard the soft tapping of her phone on the other end as she navigated to her transfer screen. "Okay," she said. "Done. Give it a few minutes to process." I sat there at my kitchen table in the house that I had built with Brandon, in the suburb of Thornfield with the maple tree in the backyard that went insane with color every October, and I watched my phone screen for the notification. It came at 7:14 a.m., transfer received, $2,200. New balance, $3,847. The exact number I'd had before Linda took my card. Back to zero, in terms of loss, on paper. But nothing was the same as it had been 12 hours ago. And I think I knew, sitting there with the morning light coming through the kitchen window, that nothing was going to go back to the way it had been. The only direction now was forward. I opened my contacts, scrolled to P. Patricia Holloway. Holloway Family Law. I clicked the number. It rang twice. "Holloway Family Law, this is Diane. How can I help you?" "Hi," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "This is Ashley Mercer. I have a consultation scheduled for Thursday. I'm calling because I'm ready to move forward sooner than that, and I have the retainer." A brief pause. "Of course, Ms. Mercer. Let me pull up your file." I sat very still at the table, listening to the sound of keys clicking on the other end of the line, watching the morning light move across the kitchen floor, thinking about the folder on my phone, the screenshots, the transaction record, the text from Linda that said we're family. The law has tools for patterns, and I had just started building one. Diane scheduled me for the following Monday instead of Thursday. When I told her the situation had escalated, that there had been an unauthorized transaction from my personal account, that I had documentation, and that I was ready to proceed, she put me on hold for 45 seconds and came back with a Monday morning slot at 9 a.m. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I spent that weekend doing 3 things. First, I called my bank. I reported the unauthorized transaction, explained that my card had been taken from my home without my knowledge, and asked them to document the dispute. The woman on the phone walked me through the fraud claim process with the kind of practiced efficiency that told me she had done this 1,000 times, and she flagged the account for review. She told me the investigation could take 7 to 10 business days, but that a provisional credit was possible given the circumstances. Before I hung up, I asked her to note specifically in the file that the card had not been lost, that it had been removed from my home by a known individual while I was asleep. "You want me to note the name?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Linda Mercer. She's my mother-in-law." Second, I organized my documentation. I had the fraud alert screenshot from 3:31 a.m. I had the location ping showing the transaction 2.3 miles from our house. I had the full transaction record. I had Linda's text. Ashley, I hope you're not going to make this into a whole thing. I'll pay you back. You know, Brandon and I have always been close, and sometimes you just have to accept that. We're family. I had the timestamp on that text. I put everything into a single PDF and emailed it to myself 3 times from 3 different email addresses, because I am the kind of person who understands that backups matter. Third, and this was the part that cost me the most, I sat down with Brandon on Saturday afternoon at the kitchen table with the documentation open on my laptop between us, and I told him what I had done. Not the divorce attorney. Not yet. I told him I had reported the transaction to the bank as fraud. I told him I had documentation. I told him that I was not going to let it go, and that if his mother did not make full restitution of $2,200 within 30 days, I was going to file a police report. He went very still. Ashley, he said, that would be a criminal complaint against my mother. I know what it would be. She's 63 years old. She doesn't have a record or anything. She made a bad decision. She made a deliberate decision, I said. There is a difference, and I need you to stop confusing those 2 things. He was quiet for a long time. Then, she said she'd pay it back. Does she have $2,200? He looked at the table. That's what I thought, I said. 30 days, Brandon. I'm telling you now so there are no surprises. He didn't say anything else. He got up, went out to the backyard, and stood by the maple tree for about 20 minutes. I watched him through the kitchen window. He had his hands in his pockets and he was looking at the ground, and I recognized the posture. It was the posture of a man who was finally, slowly, being forced to look at something he had spent years finding elaborate ways not to see. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired in a way that went bone deep, and I felt something else, a kind of preemptive grief, because I knew what was coming after Monday, and I knew that whatever happened next was going to cost me things I had genuinely loved. Monday morning, I sat across from Patricia Holloway for the second time. She had the same reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the same legal pad. She reviewed the documentation I'd sent over the weekend. She was quiet for a moment, then she set the papers down and looked at me directly. This is actually quite clean, she said. The text alone, I'll pay you back, it's family, is an admission. She's acknowledging the transaction was unauthorized and that she intends to repay it. Combined with the bank records and the fraud alert, this gives us a very strong picture. I know, I said, but I want to be honest with you. The reason I'm here isn't primarily about the fur coat. The fur coat was the thing that finally made me pick up the phone. But this is about 6 years of a pattern that I've been trying to address through normal channels and failing. Patricia nodded. She picked up her pen. Tell me about the pattern. So I told her. I told her everything. The unannounced visits, the rearranged kitchen, the Brandon's house phrasing, the daily phone calls, the way Brandon's debt to his mother functioned as a kind of override switch on every boundary I'd ever tried to set. I told her about the times I'd tried to talk to Brandon and ways those conversations had ended. I told her about the 6 years of trying to be reasonable, trying to be understanding, trying to be the flexible one, the accommodating one, the one who made the peace and swallowed the friction. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Ashley, what I'm going to file will reference the financial misconduct as the precipitating event. But the documentation you bring me about the pattern of boundary violations will matter significantly in terms of how the court views the marital dynamic. Courts in Colorado take financial misconduct seriously, especially when it involves a third party who has been enabled by a spouse. Enabled, I repeated. Brandon knew about the pattern of behavior you're describing. He had repeated notice. And when the incident occurred, his first response was to ask you to be understanding and to promise she'd pay you back. That's enabling. That's relevant. I sat with that word for a moment. Enabled. 6 years of trying to name what was happening, and here was a word that fit like a key. I signed the retainer paperwork that morning. Patricia said she would have initial documents drafted within the week. She advised me to continue living in the home, to document anything unusual, and to avoid discussing the legal proceedings with Brandon until she gave me the go-ahead. I drove home in the October sunshine with the maple tree blazing gold at the end of our street, and I thought about the fact that I had loved this house, that I had genuinely loved it, that none of what I was doing meant I hadn't. The confrontation happened 11 days later. I had not planned it for a specific day. It arrived on its own schedule, the way these things do. Linda came over on a Tuesday evening. Brandon had told her at some point in the preceding days that I had reported the transaction to the bank. He had not told her about the 30-day window or the police report possibility. I don't think he'd believed I meant it. But she knew enough to arrive at our house at 6:30 p.m. with the energy of a woman who had decided that the best defense was a vigorous offense. She was still wearing the coat. I want you to understand that. She walked through our front door, which Brandon had opened for her because he'd known she was coming and had not told me, wearing the fox fur coat she had purchased with my money at 3 in the morning. It was a long coat, dark brown with a wide collar. It was, objectively, a beautiful coat. That made it worse somehow. "Ashley," she said, as though she were the one who'd been waiting for this conversation. "Linda," I said. I was standing in the kitchen doorway. I had my phone in my hand. Not threateningly, just in my hand, because I had made a decision about what this conversation was going to be. "I think we need to clear the air," she said. She sat down at our kitchen table without being invited. Brandon hovered in the hallway behind her, doing the thing he always did, positioning himself equidistant between us, as though proximity to both people made him responsible for neither. "I agree," I said. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Calmly, deliberately. "I know you reported the transaction," she said. "And I think that was an overreaction. I told you I'd pay you back. I told Brandon I'd pay him back. You went and made a federal case out of a family situation, and now we have a bank investigation and—" "Linda." My voice was very quiet. "I'm going to stop you there." She stopped. She looked at me with an expression I recognized, the slight widening of the eyes that meant she had expected me to be softer, easier, more like the Ashley she had dealt with for 6 years. "You took my card," I said. "Not Brandon's, not a joint card. My personal card with my name on it. You took it from my home while I was sleeping, and you spent $2,200 of money that I had saved, over 8 months, for a specific purpose. You then sent me a text telling me not to make it a whole thing, because we're family. We are family." I have that text. I held up my phone. I also have the fraud alert with the timestamp, the location ping, the transaction record, and a call log from my bank documenting the fraud report I filed on October 7th. I set the phone on the table. Not aggressively. Just there. Between us. Like evidence. Linda looked at the phone. Then she looked at Brandon. "Brandon," she said. And there was something in her voice. The particular frequency she used when she needed him to do the thing he had always done, which was step in and absorb the situation and make it manageable. Brandon looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. And then he did something he had never done before in 6 years of these triangulated moments. He looked away from both of us and said nothing. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. It felt much longer. "The 30 days I gave Brandon," I said, returning my eyes to Linda. "That was a courtesy. You have until November 8th to transfer $2,200 to my personal account. If you don't, I will file a police report. In the state of Colorado, what you did is a crime under CRS 18-5-702. I've spoken with an attorney. I know exactly what the filing process looks like." Linda's expression shifted. The offense dropped away and something more uncertain moved across her face. "You spoke with an attorney," she said. "I did." "Over a coat." "Over my money," I said. "Which you took, while I was sleeping, from my home." She turned to Brandon again. Are you going to let her speak to me this way? And that was it. That was the sentence. The one she had used in various forms for 6 years. Are you going to let her? As though I were a weather event he was responsible for managing. As though his job in this marriage was to moderate me for her comfort. Brandon put his hands in his pockets. He looked at his mother with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Tired and sad, and something that might have been clarity. "Mom," he said. "Pay her back." 3 words. That was all. But they landed in the room like something structural shifting, like a sound you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. Linda stood up. She pulled the fur coat tighter around herself, which was almost too on the nose to be real. But that is exactly what she did. She looked at me with an expression that was half fury and half something I can only describe as recalibration. The look of someone who has just discovered that the ground they were standing on was not as solid as they'd believed. "I'll transfer the money," she said. Her voice was flat. "And I want it noted that I think this family has a serious problem, and it isn't me." "I think we all know what the problem is," I said. She left without saying goodbye to either of us. The front door closed. Brandon and I stood in the kitchen in the quiet, and the refrigerator hummed, and outside the maple tree was in full October color, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then Brandon said very quietly, "The attorney you spoke to, it wasn't about the card, was it?" I looked at him. "Patricia Holloway," he said. "The notification I saw on your phone, I looked her up." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He nodded slowly, like someone confirming something they had already half known. His eyes were wet, which surprised me even though it probably shouldn't have. "How long?" he asked. "I made the appointment 3 weeks ago." He absorbed that. "Was there anything I could have done? Is there anything I can—" "Brandon." I kept my voice as kind as I could because I did love him. Even then, even at the end of it. "You could have done something 6 years ago. Or 4 years ago. Or the night she stood in your doorway in a fur coat she bought with my money and you told me you'd talk to her. Any of those nights. But this particular night is too late." He didn't argue. That was the saddest part. He didn't argue because somewhere underneath the blind spot and the debt and the years of not seeing, he knew I was right. The $2,200 transferred to my account 4 days later. Not from Linda. She didn't have it. It came from Brandon. He transferred it from his personal savings account and told me via text that he had told his mother he would not be covering her debts again. Whether that was true, and whether it would last, I genuinely don't know. But the money came. On November 2nd, 6 days before my deadline. I repaid Jess the same afternoon. She texted back a single line. "Best investment I ever made. Now go live your life." Patricia filed the initial divorce petition on November 14th. Brandon did not contest it. We had a single mediation session in January, which lasted 3.5 hours, and we reached an agreement that was, by the standards of these things, relatively civil. The house sold in March. I took my half of the equity and put a deposit on an apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver. 3rd floor, big windows, a small balcony where I put a container of herbs that I have kept alive for 7 months, which is a personal record. I have not spoken to Linda since the night she left our kitchen in her fur coat. I don't expect to. Brandon and I are not friends, but we are not enemies either. We are 2 people who built something together and broke it apart carefully and are trying to carry what's left of ourselves forward with some dignity intact. That's the most honest thing I can say about where we are. People ask me sometimes, when I tell this story, the parts I'm willing to tell, whether I regret the way it ended, whether I wish I'd done something differently, pushed harder earlier, left sooner, or stayed longer. The honest answer is that I regret the years I spent being the reasonable one when reasonable wasn't working. I regret the patience I spent on a situation that wasn't going to change because it didn't need to change. It was working fine for everyone except me, and I was the one absorbing the cost of that. The fur coat didn't break my marriage. My marriage had been breaking for a long time. in the slow, invisible way that foundations crack under pressure you can't see from the outside. What the fur coat did was make the crack undeniable. It gave me a timestamp, a dollar amount, a transaction record, and a text message that said we're family, as though that word were a crowbar that could pry open any door. It gave me something I could hold in my hand. And sometimes that's what you need. Not the final reason, but the first one you can actually name out loud without someone telling you you're overreacting. Linda had wanted a fur coat. She had wanted it, and she had taken it, and she had assumed that the word family would cover the cost. What she hadn't counted on was that I had been saving for something too, and that I was done being the one who paid for other people's wants while quietly setting aside money for my own survival. I'm Ashley, and that is the story of the night I stopped being reasonable and started being free.